world, but you may not know that some of their most famous titles have been based on real events and unusual stories. Well, here are 5 Disney films that may surprise you with their origins, some of which would not have made for appropriate children's movies if they hadn't have been changed. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. When the 1937 film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was released, it was a huge hit and was the first of now many princesses for Disney. We are all familiar with the story. It's about Snow White living with her jealous stepmother who orders her huntsman to kill the princess. But unable to face killing Snow White, he lets her free in the forest where she lives with the 7 dwarfs. When the evil queen finds out that Snow White is still alive, she possesses an old hag to give Snow White a poisoned apple. When she takes a bite, she is thought to have died and lays motionless, until a prince finds her and kisses her, bringing Snow White back to life, and they live happily ever after. It's a lovely story, but the original has an alternative, pretty gory ending. The original Snow White story was written by the Brothers Grimm in 1812 and was first published in German. It shares pretty much all the similarities to the Disney film, except for when Snow White is poisoned by the apple, the prince does not kiss her and bring her back to life. He takes the casket she is lying in, trips over a branch in the forest, dropping Snow White and causing the poison apple to dislodge from her throat, and she comes back to life. Now here's where it gets dark. They then arrange a huge wedding inviting every king and queen in the land. The Wicked Queen accepts the invitation, not realizing it's her stepdaughter's wedding. And when she arrives, she is made to wear a pair of shoes that are glowing red hot, and is forced to dance until she drops dead. This was her punishment for trying to kill Snow White. It's pretty disturbing since it's supposed to be a children's story, and you can see why they didn't include that part in the film. Pocahontas. This Disney film was perhaps one of the most controversial of the Disney princess films, mainly because it was based on a true story, but was changed so much that many believe it took historical liberties with its portrayal of Pocahontas, straying too far from the facts to make it into a children's film. In the film, Pocahontas is a young American Indian woman whose father is a powerful Indian chief. He wants her to marry a native warrior, but she falls for a British captain and her father disapproves. Things are made worse when the British captain's fellow Englishmen try to rob the Native Americans of their gold. But this is very different to the true story of Pocahontas, the daughter of a Powhatan chief. She was born in around 1595 and her birth name was Matoaka. Pocahontas later came as a nickname given to her which means spoiled or naughty child. Pocahontas was part of a tribe located in Tidewater, Virginia, and her childhood would have seen the English arriving in search of the New World, which resulted in many clashes between the English and the native Indians. During this time, Captain Smith, an English soldier and explorer, was captured by Pocahontas' tribe and faced execution. This was when the then 10-year-old Matoaka threw herself at Captain Smith to stop him being executed. Now, it's unlikely there was any romance between the two like in the film, but young Matoaka was later captured by English settlers, and this is when she met tobacco planter John Rolfe. In order to secure her release, she agreed to marry him and was renamed Rebecca. This was also the first recorded marriage in history between a European man and a Native American woman. After 2 years of marriage, John Rolfe and Matoaka went to England, where Rolfe used his wife as a symbol of peace and goodwill between the English and Native Americans. It's thought that whilst in England, Matoaka ran into John Smith, the captain she saved from being executed, but she refused to speak and turned her back on him. Unfortunately for Pocahontas, whilst returning by ship back to Virginia, she became ill and was taken off the ship at Gravesend, England, where she sadly died at the age of 21. There was a lot of suspicion that her death was caused by poisoning, but this has never been confirmed. It's just crazy to think that when watching the film that it's loosely based on real historical events. In the 2010 Disney film Tangled, a story is told about a baby princess named Rapunzel, who has magical healing powers. She is stolen from her crib by Mother Gothel and taken to a hidden tower where her golden magical hair grows incredibly long. As she gets older, Rapunzel becomes curious about the outside world, especially the bright lights she sees every year floating in the sky beyond her tower prison, and she plots with a local thief to escape the tower and go on an adventure, discovering that the lights in the sky are lanterns that her parents release every year on Rapunzel's birthday. She then falls in love with the thief after bringing him back to life with her powers, and they eventually marry and live happily ever after. That is the film version of the original, which is called Rapunzel. Rapunzel starts with a lonely couple who live next to an evil witch named Dame Gothel. The neighbour who is pregnant sees a Rapunzel plant in the witch's garden and asks her husband to steal it for her to eat. She enjoys it so much that she asks him to steal some more, but this time he is caught by Dame Gothel. He begs for his life and the evil witch agrees to let him go on the condition that he hands over their baby as soon as it's born. The witch takes the newborn baby, calls her Rapunzel and raises her as her own. Rapunzel grows up to have long golden hair, and when she reaches the age of 12, Dame Gothel locks her in a secret tower. Rapunzel's hair grows so long that when the witch visits her, she shouts up for her to let her hair down. Rapunzel would then drop her hair down from the tower and let Dame Gothel climb up to her room. Then one day, a prince hears Rapunzel singing in her tower, and they eventually meet and fall in love. They both plan her escape so that they can marry, but Dame Gothel notices something is not right, so she watches the tower and finds out about the prince's visits. In a rage, she cuts off Rapunzel's hair and slings her into the woods to fend for herself. She then uses the cut hair to trick the prince into thinking he's climbing up to see Rapunzel, but when he reaches the top and is told Rapunzel is gone, he jumps from the tower in an attempt to kill himself. He survives, but thorns pierce his eyes, leaving him blind. For months he wanders aimlessly in the forest until one day he hears Rapunzel singing and is reunited with her, and she restores his sight. As for Dame Gothel, in a fit of anger, she has dropped the length of hair and is forever trapped in the tower to die. So, although the original has a good storyline, it's far different from the movie version, and wouldn't have really made for a good children's movie. Considered by many to be the greatest Disney film ever made, the 1940 film Pinocchio is told through the eyes of Jiminy Cricket. He tells how woodcarver Geppetto makes a wooden puppet called Pinocchio and how he wishes it was a real boy. Then one night he sees a shooting star and the next morning Pinocchio has come to life. One day when walking to school, Pinocchio is persuaded to join a travelling show where he performs with other puppets, and when he tries to return home to Geppetto, he is locked up by the owner of the travelling show. He is rescued by a magical fairy, but when he starts lying about what he's been up to, his nose starts to grow. Eventually, Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket return home, but discover Geppetto has gone to sea in search of him and has been swallowed by a whale. Pinocchio sets out to free Geppetto from the whale's belly, but drowns trying to save him. Because he has proved himself to be good though, he is brought back to life by the fairy and his puppet strings are removed, finally making him a real boy. The film is a classic, but the original Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi, which the film is based on, tells a much darker story. It was originally published as a weekly series in a comic-type newspaper for children. Carlo often describes Pinocchio as a wretched and thoroughly disobedient boy who laughs in the face and steals the wig of his creator and father, Geppetto. In these stories, Jiminy Cricket is not the wise guide friend of Pinocchio, but the opposite, and when he tries to tell Pinocchio off for rebelling against his father, Pinocchio bashes the insect's head in with a hammer and kills him. Pinocchio is often starved, tortured, robbed and kidnapped and has his wooden legs burnt off. Nearly every chapter of the book indicates the author's contempt for badly behaved children, with Pinocchio being made an example of what happens to disobedient kids. Carlo did not want the story to have a happy ending at all, and wanted to end Pinocchio's life by hanging him, but publishers were horrified by this ending and he was forced to bring Pinocchio back to life. This is when he introduces a child with blue hair, the character that becomes the magical fairy in the Disney film. But even after being brought back, the writer continued to endure torture and abuse upon Pinocchio in the stories, which thankfully was never shown in the film. Winnie the Pooh is a lovable teddy bear who was created by English author A. Milne and adapted by Disney into a series of short features that included Winnie the Pooh's friends Piglet, Eeyore, Kanga, Rabbit, Roo, Tigger, Owl, and the only human character Christopher Robin. Winnie and his friends enjoy several adventures in the 100-acre woods, but you may be surprised that some of them are actually based on true characters. In 1925, A. Milne based Winnie the Pooh on a soldier's bear who was sent to London Zoo when the soldier was shipped off to the front lines in France. Christopher Robin Milne, A. Milne's son, was a visitor to the zoo and loved the female bear. He named his teddy bear Winnie the Pooh, and this created the inspiration for his dad to create the yellow bear we all know of today. So Winnie the Pooh was based on the bear, and Christopher Robin was based on A. Milne's son, Christopher Robin Milne. But behind the laughter and fun, Winnie the Pooh and his friends are thought to have a deeper meaning to their characters. Now, this was never confirmed by the creator, but is a widely believed theory by many, and when you hear it, it definitely makes you wonder. It's thought the characters all show traits of mental disorders, and here are the psychological profiles of them. Winnie the Pooh is thought to suffer from a range of mental disorders. His careless and dreamy nature and disregard towards rules point to a form of inattentive attention defect hyperactivity disorder. Also, his obsession with honey and willingness to risk everything to get it indicates to some he is suffering from impulsivity with obsessive fixations. Piglet is thought to suffer from generalized anxiety disorder. His general nervousness and low self-esteem contribute to his stuttering speech and the irrational anxiety he displays. The owl seems to be dyslexic as he spells things jumbled up and in the wrong way. Tigger is unable to control his constant bouncing and has an extremely impulsive nature. Despite this, the others are drawn to him as he is very sociable, but by association they risk getting themselves in trouble due to his behaviours. Some say this is a classic sign of ADHD. Some say Kanga shows signs of social anxiety disorder. She is an overprotective, super-organised mother and is obsessed with controlling Little Roo, preventing him from making his own decisions. Kanga also tries to mother Tigger in much the same way, feeding him and looking after him, although she is unable to control him. The rabbit, who is over-organised and obsessed with having everything in the right place, has led people to believe that he is suffering from OCD. Eeyore, the downcast donkey who has a negative spin on everything, seems incapable of getting any joy out of life, and is definitely suffering from some kind of depression. And finally, Christopher Robin, with his wild imagination and stuffed toys as best friends, is thought to have created all the characters in his own head, and they represent all the feelings he is actually experiencing. Some believe Christopher is suffering from schizophrenia. But this wouldn't be the first time something like this has happened in a children's movie. Alice in Wonderland has long been linked to a person experiencing a drug trip, with many thought to be drug references throughout. Although this, like Winnie the Pooh, has never been confirmed by the creator that this was their intentions. So maybe it's just people being silly and looking into things too much, or maybe it was A.A. Milne's intention to add more character to the stories. Whatever you think, don't let any of this take away from these incredible Disney films. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next week for another.